Hello, I'm Mercedes Stevenson, and this is the West Block, politics, perspectives, and players.
American taxpayers provide between $400 million and $500 million per year to the WHO. In contrast, China contributes roughly $40 million a year, and even less. As the organization's leading sponsor, the United States has a duty to insist on full accountability.
That was President Trump last week announcing he would cut funding to the World Health Organization while the U.S. reviews the international body's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic amid allegations of a cover-up by Beijing. On Friday, the Chinese government revised the death toll for Wuhan, increasing it by 50%. So, was there a cover-up by the Chinese government, and how should Canada respond? Joining me now is Irwin Cotler, chair of the Raoul Wallenberg Centre for Human Rights and former Liberal Justice Minister. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Cotler.
Good to be with you.
Sir, you are one of over 100 experts, academics, and political figures who have condemned China in a letter that blames the Chinese government and holds them responsible for the global COVID-19 pandemic. It talks about a deliberate cover-up in this letter, which you call China's Chernobyl moment. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, what we meant by it is that China's accountability arises from the fact, number one, that they sought to suppress information, in effect, to suppress the truth to begin with. Number two, that they both arrested and imprisoned medical doctors and dissidents who tried to sound the alarm. And number three, they've been engaged since then in a global disinformation campaign to cover up the truth and to cover up their accountability.
What do you think of the Canadian government's rather muted response to questions about the validity of China's numbers and their culpability in all this? At one point, the health minister, Patty Hajdu, suggested it was sowing conspiracy theories to question China's data.
Well, I understand why the Canadian government's position has been somewhat mooted. We are between a rock and a hard place in the matter of the imprisonment and false arbitrary detention of the two Michaels. It's a delicate geopolitical moment, but the real issue has been the fact that the international community have been bystanders and enablers of what has been a pattern of, and I use the word CCP, the Communist Party, not the Chinese people. We want to distinguish between the government and its people who are the targets of their oppression. But we have been witnessing now a state-orchestrated pattern of repression respecting the Tibetans, the Uyghurs, the Falun Gong, the Hong Kong, the Taiwanese, that has been going on now for 20 years. The time has come to hold China to account in the court of public opinion, if not in courts themselves.
How do you go about doing that?
Well, what I think we can do is, number one, we should make sure that our multilateral institutions, like the United Nations, like the WHO, are not maneuvered or corrupted with respect to the CCP agenda. Let me give you one example. That just 10 days ago, China was appointed to a panel, a UN human rights panel that appoints the UN human rights experts in the areas of freedom of expression, arbitrary detention, health, and the disappeared. You can't make these things up. The four major violations that are now, and that led to the pandemic, are now allowing China to be elected to a human rights panel to choose the UN special rapporteurs, read those issues.
There have been concerns raised over just how much influence China might have with the WHO. Do you think that China should be allowed to remain in the WHO after all of this, and should they be held accountable?
Well, you know, the United Nations and our institutions is part of our DNA. And we always have seen the United Nations as the important, which it is, institution that warrants our support. So I think there was, at the beginning, you know, a kind of indulgence of the WHO because of our indulgence of UN institutions, generally speaking. It's time for Canada to revisit our involvement with these UN institutions. We need to be supporters of them, but we have to hold them accountable like the WHO. Otherwise, willy-nilly, we will be indulging in acquiescence ourselves in information which might be false, misleading, and dangerous.
What do you think of President Trump's decision to cut funding from the WHO over the China controversy?
I do believe that the WHO, as I mentioned, along with other institutions, has to be held accountable. Regrettably, President Trump is not the person to have the credibility to engage in this initiative. He himself, in terms of his presidential leadership under this, began with denial, led to delay, led to dysfunction, led to him engaging in attacks on the media and others as this being false news. So he's not the most credible figure, even if he may be doing the right thing. I would much prefer there to be a multilateral group of the community of democracies that seeks to hold the WHO to account.
How do you think that Prime Minister Trudeau should proceed?
Well, I think the Prime Minister at this point is concentrating on what is the best priorities and policies with regard to protecting the Canadian people at this point from the ravages of this pandemic which reached our shores. I think we will have to do a rethink when this matter is over and begin to ask ourselves, what are the initiatives we can take? For example, I think we should be applying Magnitsky sanctions and targeting the specific individuals in China that have been responsible for the suppression of the truth and for the arrest and imprisonment and disappearances of doctors and dissidents. We've applied Magnitsky sanctions to Russia, to South Sudan, to Myanmar, to Venezuela, but we've not yet applied any sanctions to China. By doing so, we allow them to, in fact, not be held accountable and maybe indulge their impunity.
Some say the virus would have spread no matter what, and that it's unfair to blame China in all of this. What would you say to them?
I don't know if it would have spread, but I do know, as scientific publications have shown, that 95% of it would not have spread. And all the authoritative scientific evidence is that this could have been halted at the beginning if the truth were not suppressed, if those who tried to sound the alarm were not imprisoned, and the like. So it does bear accountability. In fact, as we are speaking, the leadership in China is seeking to censor scientific publications which are seeking to still report on the pandemic then and now.
Irwin Cotler, thank you for joining us.
Good speaking with you, and thank you for having me.
That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us. For the West Block, I'm Mercedes Stevenson. Stay safe, everyone, and look after each other.